Welcome to preparations for Ordinary Sunday 15 for Luke 10, surely one of the best known passages in the New Testament canon. And welcome for the first time, Graham from Nelson. Good to have you on board. Graham and I have sat on a few chairs together. Well, I'll rephrase that. And Peg from Christchurch, and Anne, who is in close proximity to me. Great, meaty stuff, and you probably have some background.
Yeah. So first, a quick background on the place and the people. The only thing we really need to know about this road that the Samaritan was on was that it was known for being dangerous. So, Jesus is telling a story which would be one which is very plausible to that point. Next is that it's important that the man who's beaten up is both unconscious and stripped, because his ethnicity, you could have told what his ethnicity was either from the way he spoke or from the clothing he wore. But when neither of those things were available, it meant that none of the people who came past knew whether he was a Jew or a Gentile or a Samaritan. Clearly for the Samaritan, it makes no difference. But then we have these other three characters. So, of course, the priest could have helped, didn't do so. We know, many of us, that he didn't do so because of ritual contamination. But there's also a reasonable opinion at the time that it was wrong for priests to help sinners. And there was no way of telling, of course, if this man was a sinner or not. So it wasn't necessarily that the priest was a bad human being, but it's just that he put his own sanctity above the need of the injured man. He was kind of bound by the rules of his position, which in itself is a challenge. Levites, a little bit further down the kind of scale of importance to the priest, he would have been almost certainly aware of what the priest had done ahead of him on the road, because you could see pretty well from any part of the road. So it's possible that the reason he didn't stop was simply he was following the example of his superior. Something else to think about. And then finally, just to remind us of the shocking nature of this story. Yes, it was quite normal, sadly, for people to be beaten up on that road. But Samaritans really were truly, bitterly hated. It wouldn't have been a matter of slight surprise that Jesus, instead of moving on to the expected third person in the story, which would have been a noble lay Jewish person, instead of that, moved on to the Samaritan. It wouldn't have been a slight surprise to the lawyer who he's telling the story to. It really would have shocked and angered him. So you have to imagine the lawyer at the end gritting his teeth as he admitted that it was the one that showed mercy who was the neighbor, almost as if he can't bring himself to say the word Samaritan. So yeah, this is an incredibly beautiful and familiar tale to us. But as always, we have to recapture how shocking it was originally.
All right, shocking. And Anna's, at least one thing she's flagged, that the excuse often used in courts of obeying orders has just been thrown out when people are challenged for bad behaviour, criminal behaviour. Peg, let's ask you then first to go into the whole question of challenge. What is it?
For me, the challenge of this passage is it is so familiar, and people are so aware of the words that it is that they find it hard to connect to their heart the actual depth of the animosity towards Samaritans, the horror of not helping somebody. So the challenge is to actually comes at the end of the story, the go and do likewise. How do we engage our people who are listening to the story? How do I engage myself to go and do like the Samaritan?
Challenging indeed. Thank you. Graham, for you, what's challenging?
It always strikes me, and I always tend to forget until I reread it, just how far the Samaritan went. The Samaritan didn't do the bare minimum. He went, in a sense, showed extravagant mercy, extravagant love, even to the point of leaving money, going away, presumably coming back, paying the bill. And also the challenge there is the Samaritan did it without any knowledge whether, when he came back, the injured person was alive or dead. But the point was to help to offer what was needed to go over and beyond, do the utmost. And in a sense, the outcome of that's up to God.
Love the notion of extravagant mercy, which we might find ourselves talking more about. Anne.
Yeah. Well, also, I think that the extravagance of it is a challenge because we so want to narrow down the requirements of our faith. And so we so want to put little rules and regulations around, or a certain American politician recently suggesting that love needs to be family, start with family and friends, and our own circle, and kind of only if there's any left over, move beyond. And Jesus blows that apart. And, there is a church in our own country which is saying a very similar thing, that, the people who belong to us, who are in our inner circle, we love, and others, we don't want them coming to this country. And Jesus doesn't let us do that. The lawyer clearly wanted a set answer that he could then tick off. And Jesus gave him this story, which just blows the limits apart. And that's challenging. Yeah.
All right. Well, we feel challenged. Graham, I want some good news.
I think for me, the good news is that in the story, in a sense, we see modelled the extravagant love of God that we have received and that God then asks us to pass on. But also that for us, there's the letter of the law, but actually what we're called to display is the intent of the law. That actually it's the heartfelt transformation that we've received that we pass on. And I think that just leads us to sharing the love of God in extraordinary ways. So good news for us, but also good news for others.
Yeah. All right, thank you. And Anne, for you, good news.
Well, as we started, Graham wondered what to do if someone else brought forward our idea, and you've just taken mine, Graham. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to say it again anyway, because I think it's really important. This idea that this is another story telling us that we're to love because God loved us. So, the Samaritan could be God. And certainly a lot of the language that's used in this parable is used for God's approach to Israel, I think, particularly in the book of Hosea. So how do we do this hard stuff? How do we match those challenges? Only when we start with the love of God, and that wonderful line in 2 Corinthians 5, where Paul says he's compelled by the love of God. And that's haunting me. And it's such good news.
Peg, for you, where do you find the good news?
Well, the good news for me is that God is near the wounded, the man who was stripped and beaten and left for dead. He represents all who suffer, all who are overlooked, all who are broken by life. And the good news is God sees, God stops, and God helps.
Beautiful.
Thanks.
Thanks, Peg. And we've all sort of segued into very much seeing the Samaritan now as God, which is devastatingly shocking for this world. So, all right.
Yeah.
It's overcoming my first challenge, that bit.
That's right. Yes, we're trying to. Okay, so let's, this huge opportunity for a so what here. Anne, can we start with you and you tell me so what?
Okay. I want to go to the fact that it's evident that the motives of the lawyer asking this question are not good. He does call Jesus rabbi, supposedly respect, but we're told that he's out to test him. And I love the fact that regardless of what the motive is, Jesus still responds with this story that has probably done more to shape people's attitudes, loving attitudes to each other in the world than any other story. And so the challenge, or the so what, I guess, is to some extent, it doesn't matter the attitude of the people who are talking with us. Our response has to be one of speaking of God's love, even if it doesn't look like it's going to make any impact.
Graham, for you, so what?
Well, so what's for me? One is, what does the mercy or compassion, ultimately the love that God's asking us to show, look like? And that goes into a whole lot of realms. I've used this passage in the terms of the end of life discussion. Do we go over and beyond? How do we go over and beyond to show care and love to people in at their most vulnerable times. The other one that often comes up in ethics is who is our neighbour, and extending the definition of neighbour to the whole of creation. We often focus on the people, but actually we can extend the same principles that Jesus is talking about to actually the care of creation as a whole, and to all life, and to the whole of creation, because at the end of the day we're all interrelated. So there are kind of a couple of so whats, which may be slightly different from what people are expecting, but yeah.
Yeah, thanks. And music probably to all areas, as you think about that lovely notion from Genesis of being called to care for, to love, to husband creation. So thanks for bringing that in. And finally for you, Peg, what's so what for you here?
So what brings me back to the challenge of this, that if I can see God as the Samaritan, and then Jesus commissions us to go and do likewise, then I am to go and be God to others in this world as part of Christ's body, the hands, the eyes, the heart, the ears, helping, loving, seeing, including, all of those things.
Thank you. And lovely to hear this well-known passage just breathing and pulsing, breathing and pulsing this evening.
Breathing and pulsing.
All of that. Lovely to have this broken open so powerfully. Thanks, Graham, Meg, and Anne, for joining me.